It is truly an honor and a privilege to be with you at Neighborhood Church. My name is Roderick Eccles. I am so honored and so happy to be a part of this church as its pastor. I've been in Laguna for over a year now, and I have to say, there is no town like Laguna. And that's a wonderful and precious thing. Today, we have come to remember, to honor, and to recall the life and times of Mark Phineas Chamberlain. Our hearts, our souls, our spirits are here today for Mark. Born in Iowa, July 1942, and passing on from this life to the next on April 23rd of this year. We also gathered this afternoon for Austin and Belle, Sarah, Susan, Liz, nieces, nephews, friends, family, and beloveds in this room to recall his cheer, his laughter, his smile, his genuine and generous heart, indeed, his humanity. Mark Chamberlain, a lover of literature, a true citizen of the world, former athlete, a defender of nature and the environment, a man who truly might call himself a true Lagunatic. It's become clear to me over the past couple of weeks while learning about Mark that we cannot write the story of this pristine, beautiful region without recalling the life and times of Mark Phineas Chamberlain. Do you agree with that? He, in the words of one friend, was one of a kind, and he will be profoundly missed. So I welcome you to the celebration of a man whose archivist philosophy, his boundless passion for his beloved Laguna Beach, and his humorous personality made him the Mark that you both knew and loved. And how good and pleasant it is to know that Mark didn't shy away from exploring the things that matter so much in his work. He studied bodies and human life, evolution, economics, politics, the defamation of native peoples, war, even environmental concerns. This was a man who had a heart and a passion and thought for others. And we'll miss that. And we'll try to honor that by doing the same. He made us think. He called us to deeper understandings and wonder and curiosity about this world. He appealed to the loving spirit that is in each and every one of us. And so it's with pride, it's with pleasure that we come this afternoon to celebrate a decision, a man's life, to be a healing fire and a light of love to all that he met and touched. Let us remember Mark Chamberlain today.
Good afternoon. My name is Susan Chamberlain, and in your program it says Reverend Susan Chamberlain, and I am an interfaith minister, but that's not why I'm here today. I'm here today as a former wife, friend, sweetheart, companion, and soul partner on this life's journey with Mark Chamberlain. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Mark in the early years. Let me get this down here. A little bit about him, and I didn't write anything. I'm just going to be off of the cuff here, just natural. I met Mark a long time ago because we both grew up in Dubuque, Iowa. And the first time that I remember seeing a photograph of Mark and myself together was music camp when I was in 8th grade and he was I must have been in 6th grade and he was in 8th grade. And so then from music camp, and we went to high school. He was a senior, I was a sophomore. I was a baton twirler, and I marched in front of him on the football field with the band, and he was right behind me playing the trumpet or the cornet. So you see, we go way back. In high school, he was a shrimp. He was just a little guy. And so I didn't pay too much attention to him. But we both went to the University of Iowa. And when I think I was a junior, I went to this place that was a local house, actually, that had been turned into a restaurant and a dancing place. And so I went there, and I was with a date, and as I was dancing, I saw this guy sitting in a booth, and I thought, gee, who is that? And then I went past him, and I thought, could that be that shrimp from high school? Could that be Mark Chamberlain? And I thought he looked pretty good. And we went home for spring break, and I got a call from him. And that's how everything started. And Mark and I had so much in common from our time in Dubuque. We knew so many of the same people. We had done so many of the same things. I didn't have his experience on the river, but he soon made sure that I did. So he had a great boat. His dad's, he would talk about that boat, that it was a Honduras mahogany boat, and there was nothing like it. And he Gar wood too, by the way. And so we went on his dad's boat a number of times, and a couple of times we were marooned in the fog and had to stay the night on the Mississippi. And his father and my mother got really upset about that. So I remember that very well, and going out in weather where there was obviously a storm that was going to take place, and being in a terrific storm out on the river that felt like it was the ocean, with a dear friend of Mark's, Paul DuPont, and his very pregnant wife. And I thought, oh my God, what if she gives birth here? Here we were on this boat, and finally we were sort of rescued on one of these islands by people who had cottages there. And the boat got tied up to the dock, and that was the end of my river adventure. It seemed each time something happened. And I must say that the fire here and around Laguna taking place yesterday, I thought, okay, I know that Mark isn't in control of nature, but he was always very dramatic, and something would have to happen, So I was hoping at least we were going to get to have this memorial today for him. And as I'm saying that, I have in my mind's eye a picture of him. He's not a picture, him wandering around here taking photographs and laughing. So I think that Mark had a charmed life. He had a beautiful life. He and I met up at the university, and after a period of time, I came out to California. We married, and we had a little boy, Austin. We lived in Santa Ana in a bungalow, beautiful little bungalow with a quarter acre. And life had its ups and downs. And being former Mark's wife, I will say that we were both young, and we needed to carve out our lives for ourselves as well as together. And it was very obvious pretty soon into the marriage that Mark had a very independent spirit, and I had a very independent spirit, and that it was really hard to work together in these two different interest areas. So we did go our separate ways, but we stayed friends, and we stayed connected. And I always felt that Mark was one of the dear loves of my life, and I still feel that way today. It was a real tragedy to find that he was so sick, but in his life, he accomplished what he wanted to accomplish. He loved very much Laguna, and he loved very much the Mississippi River. So he spent his summers on the Mississippi on his little boat that he called Old Glory. And then you should know probably about his time here in Laguna and his love of the canyon and his concern for the environment and his the term he used, artivism, reflecting a concern in showing his concern for social, political, and environmental issues, excuse me, through his photography, through his art. He's had a wonderful life, as I've said, and though we miss him, I know that he must carry with him in his consciousness this incredible feeling of fulfillment. He has so many friends here in Laguna and elsewhere, so many people who love him, so many people that he has influenced. And I just tell you today that though I may not recognize many of you 40 years later, that I come back here to Laguna and I recall it as if it were yesterday. So I am so pleased to be here, and I am also really pleased to say that Mark had a very good woman in the later years of his life with Liz. She took care of him. She kept him geared and focused to the work he so much wanted to do, and when he was sick, she was there for him. So, thank you for being here.
The water is wide, I can cross over, and neither have I wings to fly. Build me a boat that can carry two, and both shall row, my love and I. There is a ship, and she sails the sea. She's loaded deep, as deep can be, but not so deep as the love I'm in. I know not how I sink or swim. Love is handsome and love is fine. The sweetest flower when first it's new, but love grows old and waxes cold and fades away like summer dew.
Well, I haven't really spoken to a lot of people in this many years, so I guess what can I say? He certainly was unique, and my relationship was unique with him. We had many adventures, misadventures. I'll probably tell some of those stories right now. One of them was when we drove cross country back to Iowa from California, and he was driving. He fell asleep while he was driving, and apparently we were going down a bumpy road, and he turned to look at me, and I was still asleep, but I woke up, had this weird irritated look on my face, and then just went back to sleep. And he said, like, I didn't even realized that we almost got killed, and it was kind of it's kind of humorous now looking back at it. Some other funny things, he was mischievous, and he liked to get into trouble. I felt like I was the adult in the situation frequently. We went to a friend's house. They weren't home, but they had the door unlocked. So he said, well, let's go in. I'm like, I don't think we're supposed to do that. But we went in. I kept saying, this is wrong. He left a note, and then he said, let's pull a little joke here. And I was like, that's not a good idea. He got a rubber glove and just filled it, I think, with cloths and put it at the end of the bed, thinking it would be kind of a humorous joke to his friends. But I guess his friend was on a trip. His wife came home, was by herself. When she went to bed, she felt a hand at the end of the bed and immediately called the cops. Yeah, so that was, he got an earful of that. Now it's pretty funny to talk about, I guess. But yeah, so those are like some of the few things that I can talk about. And my 9 months at hell, which was the tell, I use those playful words even as a 9-year-old, but looking back at it, I was bored. I mean, I was a kid. I was just a young kid, but just seeing the legacy that left behind for so many people, and what it did to stop the developers from taking over that canyon. I remember years later when they started building the toll roads, I was like, well, what are you going to do about it? He said, what do you think I've been doing? I'm like, he says, you want me to chain myself to the bulldozers or set some bombs off or something? But yeah, he was a very special person. It's kind of funny. He and my uncle were like the two figures in my life, and oddly enough, the baby picture was of my uncle, not my father. My dad could be very competitive too, and I think I got some of that from him. But like, my uncle and he would go bowling, and my uncle would be winning all the time. Not like he's trying to win, but my uncle would eventually start losing so that they could wrap it up, so they could go home for the day. So I got some of that, like when I would play tennis with my friends, get a little competitive, but he often told me as a kid, because I always felt like I knew more than he did. He'd always quote Mark Twain. He'd always say the quote, "When I was a boy of 14, my father was so ignorant I could hardly stand to have the old man around. But when I got to be 21, I was astonished at how much the old man had learned in 7 years." and that indeed is true. And just all that he has done, I mean, in terms of like all the people he's influenced and touched, and all the aspiring photographers out there that he's helped. And he always has been supportive of me. I mean, his view was, let me explore rather than, try and like watch out where is he going? Where's he, like my mom would always be worried about that. So I got to explore as a kid, and he also made sure he shared some damn good movies with me, and that certainly had a lasting influence on me. I mean, my love of film is my passion. That's another medium, but he made sure that I saw 2001 as a child, and then he'd talk about Dr. Strangelove over and over. I'm like, yeah, I was a little kid. And then finally, when I was a little older, he showed it to me, and I've become a Kubrick nut ever since. E.T., Shawshank Redemption, Blade Runner. We all experienced those films together, and I'd have to say that we had some really important things that we shared together. And I just want to thank everybody for coming. And it's really crowded, and apparently parking is really bad because I know there are people still trying to get in. But thank you for coming and letting me share.
So wonderful. Many of you know that I'm a writer, so I wrote out what I wanted to say so I would not forget some very important things that I wanted to convey to all of you. I met Mark Chamberlain in March 2003. I had gone to his gallery, BC Space in Laguna, to gather information for a review I was writing about his anti-war exhibition, Pretty Lies, Dirty Truths. In our interview, he was gracious, insightful, patient, and articulate, while often segueing to observations about life, art, and politics. With this auspicious beginning, I often asked Mark about his military experiences in Korea, where he was stationed during the Vietnam War. He told me about meeting damaged soldiers who were sent to Korea on their way home and about how profoundly their life stories affected him. I began to realize that his military experiences had helped to change the course of his life, to empower him to move to Southern California, to become a photographic artist, to open a gallery, and to mount many anti-war exhibitions. I also understood that Mark's efforts to help save the world through art shows was only part of his mission. He had also co-founded the Laguna Canyon Project, a photographic documentation of Laguna Canyon Road, and with his art partner, Jerry Birchfield, he was documenting changes in the canyon over time. As Mark often said, local residents see the canyon as a greenbelt buffer, while others view it as virgin territory ripe for development. But we felt it imperative to call into question prevailing conceptions of progress. We used photography, video, sculpture performance, installations, and collaborative events to address these concerns. And in fact, their art project dramatically helped to save Laguna Canyon from encroaching development. As I got to know Mark, I became aware of his inner strength, passion, and especially of his powerful sense of adventure. This adventurous spirit, along with his unconventional and creative approaches to life, were what initially attracted me to him. I moved into his home, which he often referred to as his hilltop cabin, in October 2010, and spent 7.5 glorious years there, absorbing his wisdom, his knowledge of world affairs, art, and pop culture, and enjoying his zany sense of humor. Over the years, we shared many meals together, watched historical programs on TV, while reminiscing about social and political events that we had both experienced throughout our lives that we often related to, even though we were not together at those times. Mark was an incredible storyteller, relating stories of his adventures while growing up near the Mississippi River in Dubuque. I soon realized that Mark's strengths, insights about life, and especially his fervent desire to help save Laguna Canyon grew in part from his nurturing childhood with activities including riding his bike and horses, climbing trees, and swimming, fishing, and riding boats on his beloved river. Mark and I attended many art events and exhibitions and went on 4 incredible vacations. Our most memorable trip was 3 years ago when I spent a week on his houseboat on the shores of the Mississippi. During our time there, he took me all over the town he had grown up in, relating stories of his adventures of his high school years, playing in the marching and dance bands, being on the school's tennis team, and serving as student council president. We even visited the town's cemetery where I saw graves from his ancestors, some going back 2 centuries. Mark was proud of his heritage, relating stories about his forebears, expressing appreciation for those pioneers, some of whom had helped to develop our wonderful country. While in Iowa that week, I was witnessing the development of an extraordinary individual who carried into an adulthood his childhood enthusiasm, creativity, and belief that he could accomplish whatever he set out to do, including saving Laguna Canyon. I also became aware of Mark's humility, but I wanted the world to know more about his accomplishments, and so I nominated him to be Arts Orange County's Visionary Artist of the Year. He won that award in 2014. One of the photos in the slideshow that you've just seen shows the 2 of us at that award ceremony. We worked on many projects together, editing each other's writings, while he often provided me with images from my own art-related articles. Our last project was writing the book, The Laguna Canyon Project, Refining Artivism, which describes the development of the Laguna Canyon Project. We worked on this project for 5 years, often feverishly discussing words, phrases, descriptions, and intent. But we completed this wonderful project with its many images just before he became ill with lung cancer last December. Mark Chamberlain's life story would be incomplete without bringing up the Legacy Project, which documented the evolution of the Orange County Great Park. In July 2006, the Legacy Project members converted a jet maintenance hangar into a pinhole camera, or a camera obscura. And with this device, they created the great picture, an enormous photo portraying the control tower structures and tarmac of the former air base. Mark's final adventure was his battle to overcome lung cancer. When he received his diagnosis of this illness this past January, I told him that I will always carry on his legacy, that I would do my best to convey to the world his amazing accomplishments. He entered the hospital on March 12th and remained there for 6 weeks. During his time there, he welcomed several visitors a day, talking with them about life, politics, and art. So many people visited him there that I understood just how much he was loved and respected by the community that he inhabited for nearly 50 years. A few days before Mark passed away, I told him how much I appreciated and loved him, and of how I had grown during our relationship. He called me his Pygmalion, implying that through his inspiration, influence, encouragement, and imparting of his wisdom, I had evolved in my life, relationships, and work. And indeed I had. Before I left the hospital that day, I played for him the song, I'll Love You Back to Life. You may not have heard it, but you'll hear it soon. As he sat in his hospital bed, listening to the words, I'll love you back to life and make you smile again, he was beaming, reflecting on the fact that saving his life partner, as well as others who were close to him, were as important as saving Laguna Canyon. Mark Chamberlain passed away on April 23rd at 12:01 a.m., just after the completion of Earth Day, which was so appropriate that he lived through the day. His life was so profound that I continue to feel his inspiring presence in our beloved hilltop cabin and in the expansive Laguna Canyon and its wilderness park, which he fought so valiantly to save. Now I'd like to share a few words for some of his friends. There were many more that I could have, but these are just from 5 people. From James Lariger, Mark was a passionate, avid, articulate, unrelenting, and at times stubbornly adversarial artivist. From Eric Stoner, I was most grateful to Mark for his generous mentoring when I was moving towards professionally shooting artwork in my career. From Audra Eagle Young, I feel thankful for the stories and memories Mark shared with my colleagues and me, but even more grateful to take in all of the beauty of the land that he felt compelled to fight for. From Karen Foyer-Schwager, it is our good fortune that we have a legacy of Mark's activism, as well as his archives of masterly photographic work to appreciate in posterity. And from Doug McCullough, finally, we will all miss Mark. It will be like looking across a familiar, solid horizon and noticing that a high peak has disappeared. Thank you.
What have they done to you? What have they put you through? What could it be? Who could have treated you like this? Not that you need to say, it don't matter anyway. What matters now is that I'm here. No matter what it is, I'll love you back to life and make you smile again. You'll sleep here in my arms until the nightmares end. They'll never hurt you now. You're safe as you can be. Just let the memory go and leave the rest to me. I'll love you back to life. Who could have more to give? Ask any less to live. Happy and smart, who shows their heart so easily? I'd take your pain, I would, if there's some way I could. All I can do is what you do. If they done this to me, I'll love you back to life and make you strong again. We'll put up twice the fight. If things go wrong again, I'll give you back your dreams. That fire that burned in you, I know how hard it seems, but wait until I'm through. I'll love you back to life.
I want to start off by saying I'm so happy to have this opportunity to talk about Mark. Thank you, Liz. I appreciate being invited. I feel like I've been so blessed in my lifetime. I've known so many truly amazing people, and Mark, I count him amongst those really amazing people. He very much, I often thought of Mark as being somebody you'd like to be when you grew up, and so it was nice to be able to spend time with Mark and hang out with him. I met Mark in the 70s. Didn't know him that well, but we were both hanging around the art scene, and he had a gallery, and we bumped into each other. I really got to know him better in the 80s. And in the 80s, in the early 80s, we both, of course, had a gallery. He would come to my gallery, which was at that time in Fullerton, and then I would come to his gallery. And, you know, when you go to the gallery, there's not a lot of people there, and you'd have time to talk, and we had some amazing conversations. Then later, I worked at Laguna Art Museum, and of course, Mark did our photographs at the museum. And so, again, I got to know him and spend more time. Plus, I must say that, you know, working in a museum, the politics are often pretty intense. It was really nice to be able to walk down the hill and go to BC Space and, you know, have a conversation with Mark and talk to him. And then, over the years, I was fortunate to work with him in a number of capacities. I wasn't working at Laguna Art Museum at that time, but I curated the show on the Laguna Canyon project, which was at Laguna Art Museum. And then I also worked on the BC Space exhibition. And it was just always such a pleasure to work with Mark. As I said, we had amazing conversations. As Mark often admitted, with a smile on his face, he had the gift of gab. And Mark could talk and talk and talk. There's two wonderful things about that. One was that he knew a lot. I mean, the things that he knew and the conversations we had were just, you know, enthralling. We would literally talk for hours about things, you know, ranging from things that have been touched on already today, like, for instance, you know, politics, of course, religion, philosophy, and the Mississippi River. Mark obviously knew a lot about that. You know, its history, local art scene, we would talk about that too. Over the other thing that was great about Mark was that he not only, he was one of those rare people that had that gift of gab, but he was also a good listener. And he cared deeply about people, and he would listen to what the other person was saying. Like I said, that's not a combination that doesn't often go together. Obviously, he had a persistence and a tenacity. You know, Austin mentioned reference to Mark Twain. I've often thought as Mark as being a Tom Sawyer kind of figure. You know, if there was anyone that could get a bunch of people to go out and paint a fence white, it was Mark. He had that ringleader capacity about himself. And of course, as several people have alluded already today, he has left a lasting legacy for us. There's, of course, the canyon. Also, a lot of you in this room will recall the big fight over the merger of the museums and the formation of an organization called SLAM, which was hell-bent on keeping the museum here in Laguna Beach. And Mark formed another organization that was more radical than that organization, which I think, you know, looking back at it, I think that organization actually had some impact because I think it moved the dial a little bit in terms of what SLAM was ultimately able to get. And, you know, Mark had an impact in so many ways. Another area that he had an impact in is, of course, photography. BC Space was not only a place to exhibit political art, but it was also a place to exhibit photography when there weren't a lot of venues for photography in Southern California. And as a result, BC Space did some really important photographic exhibitions, in particular one-person exhibitions of people whose careers were inspired and buoyed by that and went on to have successful careers. Another thing, too, that's people sometimes forget is that Jerry and Mark had a photographic development business in BC Space. And it was a very important business because all of us know in the history of photographs, right? We've all seen those photographs that faded, The colors dropped out. Well, there was not a process, or there were very few processes, that allowed you to develop a color photograph that would last for a long time. And they were one of the first people to do that, and for a long time in Southern California, they were one of the few options, indeed the only option in Orange County, if you wanted to develop a color photograph that would have sustainability. And of course, as Liz mentioned too, the political exhibitions that he did was incredibly important. I'm going to miss, like all of you, I will miss Mark very much. But I will have with me those wonderful conversations we had over the years, and I'll be able to reflect on those. And, every time that I drive into Laguna Beach through the canyon, I think of Mark. As an art historian and curator, I'm very keen on activist art. And the interesting thing about activist art is, as you look at it, you can look at different art projects or different drawings that maybe move the needle a little bit. But I think in the history of art, what happened with the Tell and what happened in the canyon with preventing a development is one of the few times, and perhaps the only time in the history of art, where you can literally pinpoint the point at which a work of art had an exact change and made an exact difference. And so, as I drive through the canyon every time from here on out for the rest of my life, I will always continue to think of Mark as I drive through that canyon and think of the impact that he made and the fact that there's not a bunch of hotels and golf courses and stucco houses there. And I'll be grateful to him for that and so many other things. Thank you for giving me this chance to speak.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for being here to share and celebrate Mark's life. I'm kind of a strange combination of things with Mark. I am a friend of his, I'm a kind of collaborator, and I'm one of those troublemakers who was kind of in the trenches getting things done when he had those mischievous times that we all kind of know of Mark, things that he wanted accomplished. I've known Mark since I was 21 years old and met him at Laguna Art Museum when I was an installer. He would come and do all the art photography, and not only would he be photographing, but he would also educate all the curious artists who worked at the museum on how to photograph your work and how to figure this stuff out ourselves, because we all were on a shoestring budget and could never hire photographers. And so many of us at the museum and many of the young people he interacted with became pretty good photographers, and if we ever had a question, we would always be able to call back in and get some support. Over the years, as my career progressed, Mark was my collaborator through all those years. When I was at the Laguna Art Museum, he worked with me on all the shows, and then when I left and was at Grand Central Art Center, Mark worked with me on every exhibition for 10 years. He actually, between Mark Chamberlain and Eric Stoner, all the publications that we did through the Grand Central years have art. I mean, the actual art is photographed by Mark Chamberlain or by Eric. And that's over 36 major publications. Mark was very busy with us. He did all our installation shots. He was a technician. He also went out and was with the artists in their studios, documenting full collections of art. And he was masterful. I mean, he could go into any studio, any home, any environment, and set up a studio, and every shot was perfect. And it was on film. It wasn't digital. In those days, you had somebody who was really an artist and a craftsman making your photographs, and Mark was the master. And the history of Southern California art was documented many of the times by Mark. Mark was the most generous person. When I was coming up, he, again, like always inspired all the young curators, all the young artists. He always took all of us under his wing, and he would invite us to BC Space, and he would share all his insights and passions for art and music and celebration and having things to look forward to and having adventure to look forward to. his years of going back to the river over and over again, he would always come home and he would share all his stories with me. And he would always tell me, make sure to carve out a special place in your life, Andrew, where you could go and have moments where you could escape and explore and have adventures. And I always tried to do that over the years. I tried to find my own special places and share those stories with him. We traveled together, did big projects where we were gone for periods of time photographing for book projects. And he was so much fun to travel with because we would work so hard all day long. And at the end of the day, he would just look at me and he'd go, really, really good meal? Yes. And he'd say, some fun, some sightseeing? Yes. And we would go take off into the city in New York or wherever we were, and we would have this grand adventure. And one time we were in New York, we were traveling along this road going to this very cool restaurant that we had picked out, both of us foodies and really interested in trying something new. And we were walking along the street, and he was photographing kind of this alleyway, and I was on the other side photographing and kind of walking down, and he looked at me and he said, Andrea, what's that on the ground over there? And I was looking in the dark, and all of a sudden I saw this shiny thing, and I went running over to get it. And it was the world. It was an actual miniature globe of the world. And it was made out of these beautiful shells and things that had been formed over a round shape. And it was on a little stand, and somebody had dropped it out there and left it in the street. And I was like, we found the world. I mean, we actually found the world in Manhattan. And he looks around like this, he goes, there's nobody looking, take it. And so I took the world, and he goes, what are you going to do with it? And I looked at him, and I go, you know what I'm going to do with it? And he goes, you're going to give it to Alex. And I said, that's right, because that's what we do. We give the world to the next generation. And he gave so much of that world back to us. The canyon and all these projects, he taught us to walk gently on the earth below our feet. And he taught us to look at things with all their subtle details and beauty and mystery. And all the conversations I had with Mark over all the years I knew him, we would always talk about the mystery and the wonder and the adventure of all those small little details, of all those special things that were going on around us. And he taught me to look closely and to be very appreciative of all those things and the people. When I was at the hospital with him, and even prior to the hospital, we would talk a lot about all the friends, all the artists he worked with, all of you that are here, that he loves so much. And he would always say, oh, Andrea, I'm the lucky one. He said, I am the luckiest person because I got to be with all these amazing people and share in their art and share in their life, and I got to be with them. Because I would always tell him, you're a champion for people. You always think about all of us, and you always share with all of us, and you always bring us along on your journey. And he would always say, I'm the lucky one. I'm the lucky one. I get to have all of you in my life. And at the end, right before when the last days, he was saying to me with his lips, he was like, lucky one. I'm the lucky one. And I was saying, you are a lucky man. You are a lucky man. And he felt it all the way through his entire life, how incredibly fortunate he was. There's another little story about Mark, and it's just special to me, but Mark and I talked a lot about girl stuff. And I know you guys are thinking, Mark talking girl stuff. Well, I'm a girl, and I didn't have a lot of support, growing up with different people to talk to. And when I met Mark, he loved to talk and he loved to listen. So I would take him all my girl stuff problems and all my dating things and all my husband things and all my stuff. And Mark was just riveted. It was like, I was like a telenovela. I was like this soap opera that would show up. And it was not art, and it wasn't anything else, so we'd be all busy doing stuff, but then I'd be like, oh, Mark, there's this whole thing going on with this friend of mine, and I don't know what to do. And he's like, tell me all about it. And I'd be like, do you want to sit down, and do you have time? Oh, I have time. You just tell me all about it. And every time we would go through these long conversations about whatever I was dealing with, he would say to me, be true to yourself. You know the right answers. You know the right direction to go. Just be true to yourself. He goes, you'll never doubt yourself or anything. He goes, listen to your inside voice. Just be true to yourself. And I always tried to do that and be true to myself and follow that, because I watched him, and like Mike was saying, when I see Mark, when he says, when I want to grow up and be like Mark, I think Mark made me want to stay 7, or 8, he made me want to stay a kid forever. And I think that we have that in him. We have this model of maturity and education and knowledge and wisdom and this mountain. And then we also have this playmate and this fun joker who just dug into everything and made it magical. And for me, every day I feel him with me and I think of him and I know his effect on all of us is epic. He was a very special person. One of the things he told me before he passed was he says, I need you to know that I am the lucky one. But he also said, I need you to carry on. I need you all to carry on. And I promised him, and I hope you guys will go along with me on this, I promised him we will all carry on, and we will become the mountain, and we will change the landscape, and we will make the world a better place, and we'll leave the earth behind for the next generation. Thank you.
I'm not really sure how I've been elected to come up here. I didn't realize I was going to be, but I'm first of all honored to say that Mark was a friend of mine. Over the last few years, over the last 10 years, I've come to know Mark through BC Space and through the Solstice events. But we've had common friends. I saw him at the tennis court 15, 20 years, over the last 15, 20 years up at Alta Laguna. He's always had a kind spirit, but our mutual friend of ours is John Gardner. He recently passed away as well. And we just had some common threads that wove our lives together. He's somebody that I admired, not only for his environmental activism and his fierce spirit for standing up for what is right. But I guess I'm here. I've been kind of uh-oh, I thought it was my phone. I look at people in Laguna Beach and I look at the history of the town as an artist colony over 100 years ago and the importance of what that means in today's society, and I see what he's stepped up for. Mark is he has a legacy, a vision that we all are here to celebrate, but he also has something that he's manifested over time. BC Space should be, I feel, a Laguna Beach Cultural Heritage Museum, and it's something that this town needs, and the town is the #1 arts town in America is Laguna Beach, folks. $3,000 per household go to the arts here. That's what each household spends on the arts. #2 in the United States is Miami with $1,000. This is the arts town for America, and we have an opportunity right now to demonstrate how powerful that is and why the arts are the most powerful force. This space allows us that. His dream and everything he's built comes from that space he and Jerry put together, and his dream of an art gallery that wasn't about making money or selling artwork. It was about changing people's minds and ideas through artwork, through provocative shows. BC Space should be an engine for the arts and for important ideas. And it's also a monument to Mark Chamberlain. So in the future, again, anybody that's interested in finding out how to keep BC Space, that dream alive, we have a little sign-up sheet over there. If you can leave your contact information, we'll let you know how we're going to do that, what's going to happen with the space, and how you can help. I don't know. I've been listening to everybody else come up here, and Mark, I'm in honor up above right now. I'm just honored that our lives came together. He took the time to listen to my dreams, and my dreams had to do with a little bit different art form of music. In my view, the artists are the most powerful people. They're the ones that can inspire and channel the spirit. The best artists are the ones that get out of the way of it and don't have an agenda to try to manipulate it for their favor. They're trying to do something, they're inspiring because they have respect for something much greater. I'm not talking religion, I'm talking about something that we all have inside of us. And Mark understood that. He took the time to listen to what I had to say and the things that I thought were important. Yeah, that was the music scene. The most misunderstood part of the art scene is usually they were trying to close a bar down or whatever because of noise issues and stuff like this. But he understood that these people are able to draw attention and inspire and then shine a light on important community issues. BC Space is not just an art gallery. It's a space where we can have amazing musicians, poets, anything that's important in this town. Most importantly, Laguna Beach Heritage Art Museum to illustrate what this town is all about, the value of art in Orange County, the epicenter of art in the United States, right here at Laguna Beach. We have the opportunity, and this BC Space is sacred ground because it can allow us a foothold to demonstrate the power of this. And it's so important, I can't say more about it. I'm sorry I'm not more articulate. Sometimes it will flow like Mark, Paul Freeman, a friend of mine, said it best. Mark spoke in final copy. I'm just the opposite of Mark. I'm just the opposite, but I thank you for your time, Mark, above us. I know you're with me every time I close my eyes, and I think of you. You're right there. And this picture over here, I see his spirit right there. He is with us as long as we don't lose the understanding that of what his vision is, what his dream is. We can all add to it, but what a great start. And that is Sacred Ground, BC Space. Please sign the book, and thank you for having me up here.
We're running a little bit over, but is there anyone else who would like to come forward and say a few words?
I want to touch on something about Mark. I tried to find a quote befitting for him. So, of course, I went to Twain. Twain said, "A gentleman is someone who knows how to play the banjo and doesn't. Last time I saw Mark, Rosalie and I visited him in the hospital, but he was too sick, so he left a card by his bedside. Later that night, he called me to tell me how much he enjoyed the card, that it gave him a great chuckle. And that's the best thing that I could hear from him in those last moments. Oh yeah, the card, it was a Photoshop I did of Wednesday Addams. Do you remember her? From the Addams Family? And I had her juxtaposed with Sarah Huckabee Sanders. And the card read, "Before and After." Because they do look kind of alike. And I'm happy he left with a smile on his face because he gave so much to us. Thank you.
Hi, I've known Mark for a little over 20 years. I met him through Jerry. I met Jerry in Atlanta, of all places, at a Society for Photographic Education conference, and I showed Jerry some of my work, and he showed it at Orange Coast. I was working a lot on nuclear issues at that time. Mark saw that show, and he showed it again at BC Space, and we were fast friends. In the early 2000s, we went on the river together. He invited me to join him. We spent 6 weeks. We took that boat, 10 tons, on a flatbed up to the head of navigation in Minneapolis. And it was quite a journey. We found out that the bottom was held together by paint. The steel was gone. And we were constantly pumping the thing out. We got hung up on a piece of pipe about this long on the bottom that stuck out on a log, an old log in the river. And finally a fisherman came by and pulled us off, and after that the leak got a lot worse. I sat in a hotel once we got to Dubuque and looked out every morning, every afternoon, a hotel where I could see, an old hotel a really old hotel, where I could see the Arse Harbor where we'd pull the boat in, because I'd have to go down and start the pump up and pump it out every morning. But we had many adventures together, to say the least, bushwhacking up everywhere, up the little side streams, and that was a shallow draft boat, and that's why I loved it. Mark was McHuck to friends and family for obvious reasons, as so many have spoken to, and he loved that big river. When he was a teenager, he would swim the river. It was a mile across in the afternoons and swim back. That 1959 River Queen boat with a searchlight on top, he had planned to take it all the way down to New Orleans and beyond. He didn't make that part of the journey. He was there on that boat every summer. He'd fix it up, put it out in a farmer's field over the winter, and then have to fix it up again. But that was his dream. That was his dream. He did finish that journey. He imagined that journey, and he did take that journey over and over again. I imagine, and several people I've spoken to, believe that had he lived another 6 months, he probably would have gone out this summer and disappeared, and then been right in that river, and he'd be there forever, and he is. So I want to thank you all for being here. It was a great journey to be with him, as so many of you have spoken to, and we will be speaking to this afternoon. Bye now.
We have time for one more person to come forward.
I've known Mark for a long time. I just want to say a couple words about him. One, the smile on his face in the hospital the day the book on the Tell came out, or the Laguna Canyon Project. He was ecstatic. It was about a week before he died. His spirits were still pretty up, but the beam on his face that day made it all worthwhile, and I felt that he could die in peace at that moment. I wanted to share a couple anecdotes with you about Mark that you may or may not know. One, that his lineage was on the Mayflower, the first people who came to this country. Two, that he was an avid tennis player. He played Jan Kodesh, who was one of the top 10 world tennis players at the time. He was really, really proud of that accomplishment. And also, you may not know, because you've seen him working BC Space and the marvelous sales that he had there all throughout his career. He had an MA in business, which was kind of a shock to most people. So the thing that that Andrea talked about, and quite a few people did too, Mark was such an incredible mentor to me. I met him about 20 years ago. I was a novice photographer. Mark shared his wealth of knowledge. He was just an open book. There was nothing about his knowledge that he would keep to himself. He just wanted to share and help people find their vision and become better at what they wanted to do. And that's the thing about Mark that will always touch me, is his generosity and his spirit. And thank you for being here. Thank you, Susan.
And so we're now at the point where we're going to be closing the program. And I wanted just to say that what you just mentioned about Mark having an MBA, I was in the writer's workshop at the University of Iowa. And that's when Mark and I started to see each other. And he was a business major. And I had the more liberal views, political views, that is, and was a protester at the university. And not that Mark wouldn't be, but he hadn't quite made that step over yet. And so I thought, oh, good, there's a very intelligent, pragmatic person here that, we're great together, because I need a little bit more guidance. I was sort of all over the place as a young poet, and Mark went off to Korea in the Postal Service for the Army, and when he came back, he wasn't a business major anymore. He had long hair, and he was, taking photographs, and I said, well, you're not an artist, I'm the artist. And so we had some arguments about that. I thought you were supposed to be a businessman, but we were both young, and what I realize in our lives, looking back, it's so interesting. Each one of us is a story. Each one of us. And we go through all of these different chapters. And Mark and I were in, I suppose maybe like chapter 10, 12, something like that, of the Book of Life. And we were trying to figure things out. When he came back from Korea, though, he knew what he wanted to do, that he had been smitten by photography. And the other life that he was designing himself for as a businessman was simply because of his dad. He was to take over the Chamberlain insurance company, and he didn't really want to do that. And so, it was interesting how everything played out. And Mark followed his dream, and he was always very supportive of my writing and my teaching, anything I wanted to do. But we never got to our last project. He did his project with Liz, but Mark and I had planned to do a book together of poetry as well as the Dubuque passages. And when he was in the hospital, he asked me if I would please take the Dubuque passages, his very first photographic series, back to Dubuque. And I go back to Dubuque each year, and I always think of Mark. He lived a half a block from where my grandfather lived on the bluff. And he photographed my grandfather's house many times. So there are just so many tie-ins. When we look at our lives and think of the people who have come in and out, it's just like a weaving. It's like a tapestry, and there are these threads that go in and out and create different images and patterns. And Mark has been a very important thread in my life. And we have not had a conventional lifestyle, either one of us, but I am so grateful that he was, that young Mark that I knew, found his way, and his persistence, his intelligence, and his creativity were so much responsible for helping out in this world, because I think that's what many of us believe, that we're here to be of service to life itself, and each in our own way. And so I am taking the Dubuque passages back to Dubuque, and I'm going to work on the poetry that he always supported. He always supported my writing. And we just didn't have time to finish it all together. But his part is done, my part is yet to do. So thank you so much for being here today. We're going to have a lovely reception following. And there is a song that will be played. Actually, there are two of them. One of them is the Last Farewell. When Mark and I were young, we sang together. We even gave assemblies, sang at assemblies here in Laguna for elementary schools. And they were folk songs and so forth. And one of the songs was the first one you heard when the program started, "The Water is Wide." And he would sing that and play his guitar, and I would sing the song I knew that followed the same melody, but was called "The Last Farewell." And our voices would intermingle, and that was one of the most joyous times that Mark and I had, singing together. And when our friends were around, or we had a fire out in our backyard in the we had a 1/4 acre, so we had a fire pit back there. And it was just great, those beautiful evenings and that time of life when there were so many promises of the future and you didn't know what they would be. and that we have reached this point now of saying to Mark, good job. And if there is something going on in a world hereafter or in consciousness, I know he's active and busy. And if not, he had a great one. So thank you for being here. The last farewell will play. And then as we leave, the great song, Proud Mary, Rolling on the River, to send us all into the reception room for conversation and good talk. Thanks.
The wild and the rolling sea, I bid you stay, stay here by my side and share a last farewell with me. Snow-clad mountains, proud and tall, o'er 1,000 miles, cross the burning sand, our last farewell, then will I recall. Song is all I know, yet I love